He doesn't give an F.
The impacts of economic globalization spin like an atomic bomb.
If there was any example in the history of the world that this works, we'd all feel a little bit better.
Not everyone is going to be happy about it.
It's the politics of retribution. Who knows what happens next? Hi, everyone. Welcome into Sanity with Alisyn and Dave. You probably need a dose of sanity today because the tariffs, President Trump is, I hate that term doubling down. He's more than doubling down. He is so convinced of the rightness of his position on tariffs that he is sort of looking forward to it. I mean, today he was asked many times in many different directions and angles, and he just can't wait for the positive repercussions of tariffs to kick in.
And he says sometimes you got to take your medicine, which is a really bad analogy for what's going on and how the American people are hurting right now, losing 10 to 20% of their retirement. And now he's threatening an additional 50% tariff on China. And as I've said all along here, we should take on China. They are ripping us off and have been for decades. He's right on that. But you can't take on China alone. And that's what economists have said for decades now. If you're going to do it, you got to do it as part of the global community. You got to do it with the EU. You cannot take on China alone because they think in terms of 10-year cycles. They have a president who's an emperor. He's not worried about the ups and downs. Well, thankfully, he is term limited, we think. But there are a lot of voices who are starting to come out and be very critical of the president. Jamie Dimon, arguably the most influential businessman, JP Morgan CEO, said these tariffs will clearly increase inflation and decrease growth. Bill Ackman, a huge Trump supporter, billionaire hedge fund guy, he was very, very critical. And what he said, I thought was scary because he's a big supporter. Where was he? He says on April 9th, if we enact these tariffs, we will launch economic nuclear war on every country in the world. Business investment will grind to a halt. Consumers will close their wallets and pocketbooks. We will severely damage our reputation with the rest of the world. That will take years and potentially decades to rehabilitate. That is Bill Ackman, a man who knows a lot about the economy, and that's terrifying.
It's really interesting that President Trump is so sanguine. As you know, he's playing a lot of golf right now. And I thought that press conference that he had about how right he feels about tariffs, he was, I think, quite articulate during that. He doesn't seem to be sweating it. And I did hear a Republican say, well, of course, this is the right messaging. You don't want him to look nervous. He believes in this. You want him to appear very relaxed. I think he is very relaxed. And it's very interesting that he's not sweating it when all of these allies of his and donors are freaking out.
Yeah, he is confident right now. And as some of his insiders have said, he doesn't give an F right now. He's at peak, I don't give an F. You may find him articulate. His Treasury Secretary, on the Sunday show, Scott Bessent asked, what does he make of this market meltdown in the last couple of days? We're going to play that for you. And then after him, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who was the Treasury Secretary.
Good. I'm glad that you're teeing that up. Let me be clear. I don't find President Trump very articulate. I find him at his most fluent, at his best, and at his most fluent talking about tariffs. But I would say the bar is low for his articulation.
Fair assessment. Okay. Now, I want to hear your assessment of Scott Bessent, the current Treasury Secretary. Listen.
Markets are organic, the animals, and you never know what the reaction's going to be. One thing that I can tell you as the Treasury Secretary, what I've been very impressed with is the market infrastructure, that we had record volume on Friday, and everything is working very smoothly. So the American people, they can be very take great comfort in that.
This is the biggest self-inflicted wound we've put on our economy in history. We're increasing inflation because the prices are higher because of the tariffs. That gives people less spending power. That means fewer jobs. Markets are looking at all of that, and they think companies are going to be worth $5 trillion less than they thought before these tariffs started. And that's just the loss to companies. If you add in the loss to consumers, a reasonable estimate would probably be something like $30 trillion.
Scott Bessent couldn't even finish his sentence. At some point, he just petered out. He couldn't sell it. He unwound there in the middle of it. Like he was spouting different kind of nonsense, and then he just unwound.
You don't want to put that guy out on a Sunday show again, not until these tariffs are off. And just to remind you what he said there, he thinks Americans should take comfort in knowing that there was record volume. Yeah,
down.
Everyone's selling everything. 90% of S&P 500 companies went down.
Yeah.
Take comfort in knowing that the system didn't implode.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. He was like,
"Oh dear God,
the infrastructure is good of the market." What? I know. And then he goes, and I think the American people should. And he just petered out. He couldn't remember how we're supposed to feel good about this.
I do think Larry Summers. I don't always agree with him, but the Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton really put it in its proper perspective. What is going to happen? What is happening right now? And there are very few people who can articulate how this is going to work. That's the problem for him. There's very few people. I've reached out to dozens of Republicans. None of them will come on this show.
We have a segment called What Are We Missing? And maybe our next guest is going to be able to do that.
All right, let's listen first to Ben Shapiro and Senator Ted Cruz on what they think about tariffs. Listen.
It is a tax paid for by Americans. So this is a massive tax increase on American consumers. That's what it is. And it is designed to be so. And it is talked about in these terms by the Trump administration that this will cost $700 billion in additional revenue to the government. You know what we call revenue to the government typically? Paid for by Americans, because that's who pays for it. If you're importing a product and nobody buys it, then you stop importing the product and nothing gets paid to the government. It has to be sold. That is the consumer pays the tax. That is what we would call a tax increase.
Look, I think it is a mistake to assume that we will have high tariffs in perpetuity. I don't think that would be good economic policy. I am not a fan of tariffs. If the result is our trading partners jack up their tariffs and we have high tariffs everywhere, I think that is a bad outcome for America. Tariffs are a tax on consumers, and I'm not a fan of jacking up taxes on American consumers. So my hope is these tariffs are short-lived.
Okay, Alisyn, it's not every day I can say, I'm with Ben Shapiro and Ted Cruz here. I truly am with them on tariffs. So I want to talk more about that with Gabe Guidarini. He's the president of the University of Dayton College Republicans, really the group that you could say put Donald Trump into office. Young men were the biggest flip in this recent election. So Gabe, you heard Ted Cruz and Ben Shapiro say tariffs are simply taxes on the American people. I'm with them. What about you?
I actually don't agree with them. I think there is a decent amount of discourse within the Republican Party on this issue. But at the end of the day, I don't think that tariffs are a tax on consumers. They're a tax on companies and corporations that try to get past and try to gouge prices by exporting American jobs to China, Mexico, and other foreign countries. And I think that a lot of Republicans, they still follow this old way of thinking, this Reaganite way of thinking that prioritizes the interests of these companies over the American people. And I live here in Ohio. I've seen the impacts of economic globalization right here at home. And what it's done, it's been like an atomic bomb for the communities here. Everywhere you go, there's an abandoned factory. And when you look into it, you realize, oh yeah, they sold their manufacturing abroad so that the company could get lower prices so that they wouldn't have to charge as much. That's concerning to us. And people here in Ohio were the ones that elected Donald Trump. This was a state that voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012. And Donald Trump won in 2016. That was one of the states that helped him win the election over Clinton. They voted for him again in 2020 and 2024 because he talked about this issue, because he talked about how companies are getting greedy and they're using this practice of outsourcing in order to send jobs overseas, thus depriving Americans of jobs for companies here. And at the end of the day, too, another thing that I feel like a lot of Republicans like Ben Shapiro and Ted Cruz are forgetting about this is that it's not just about jobs. That's one big part of it, but it's also about national security. How is it being economically free when we are enslaved to China, which is a communist country that now produces all of our goods? They produce a lot of our electronics. They produce a large amount of the electronics that we use in our military, and they can be seen quite credibly as an adversary of the United States. And I
And
don't want
that's a
my
great
children or
point.
grandchildren.
And I don't
I don't want
mean
my
to interrupt
children.
you, but I just want to unpack some of that real quick. There's a lot to unpack there before we continue on. I agree with you wholeheartedly on China. The problem is there's a right way and a wrong way to take on China. And the right way is the only way to take on China is with everybody else on your side, notably the EU. But when you go at China alone, you know what happens? The rest of the world is going to start dealing with China, and we're going to be on our own. And that's the problem with dealing with China on your own. You need everybody else to take them on.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we're going to be able to do. You know, we look at Trump, he's currently negotiating these tariffs with other countries, and I'm excited to see how these negotiations are able to go. Because if we're at the end of the day, if we're able to get a better deal, a better bargain for what we're exporting abroad or for what we're importing from other countries, that's going to be a major benefit, not only for Americans, but also for just generally our stature in the world. In Europe and Africa, especially these other foreign countries across the world, China's been walking over us for decades at this point. It's been increasing since every year that I've been alive. And I feel like it needs to end. And we have to stop waiting for other countries to do it. We have to be the spearhead. And I feel like this bold move, this sort of shock and awe tactic that the Trump administration is pursuing, this is one of those tactics that's going to help us lead the world. And I feel like what we're going to do after this proves to be successful is other countries in the free world are going to start following our example and showing China that they cannot just simply extort the rest of the world.
Yeah, that is, I appreciate you saying that, and I really want to get your take on what the time frame is. When you say when this works, when this turns around, when all the other countries see how successful this is, how long are you willing to give this?
That's the complicated thing about tariffs, in that in the short term, there's going to be market volatility and not everyone is going to be happy about it. But the actual results that are positive from it come much later. It's like withdrawing from a substance you've been using. If you're an addict, say, what you're going to have is you're going to have the withdrawal, and it's not going to be pleasant, but you also won't die of heart disease or liver failure in 10 years. People are going to see the impacts of this later on when America has more leverage. It has more economic flexibility to do what they want because our goods are produced here and our companies are producing their goods right here at home, and we won't have to bargain as much with foreign countries. It's things like that that's going to produce much stronger long-term results for the United States. And right now we haven't been seeing them, and what's resulted in is us getting completely screwed with these trade policies over the past several years.
Yeah, I mean, withdrawal sometimes takes 28 days at a rehab. Like, just to be clear, I hear what you're saying, Gabe, and I
Which will
appreciate
be a
your
recession
perspective.
right now.
So, but I mean,
Much
for
more long
people,
term than that.
right, for people who are, worried, how long are you personally? What's your comfort level? Are
When
we
you don't have
talking
a
about?
401k, it's very different,
That's
right?
true.
I mean, people are losing 10, 20% on their retirement
That's
right
a
now.
good point, but I mean, Gabe's going to go out into the work world for sure soon, and wants to not be in a recession, and wants there to be jobs. But seriously, are we talking a year? Are you willing to give it a year? Are you willing to give it 6 months? I mean, how long do you anticipate this level of anxiety?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to say how long it is. I'm not as well versed in market analytics to understand how long this timetable
But
would
she's
go
asking you.
exactly.
Yeah, how long? What's
I
your
would
window?
say my window is I would wait to see at least until halfway through Trump's presidency, through his second term that we're currently in right now. Because I feel that by that time, markets will have adjusted and we'll have actually starting to see some results of what's going on. It may even come sooner than that. Who knows? If Trump is able to negotiate really good deals with these foreign countries with the leverage that he has imposed on them through these tariffs, we may end up getting a lot more positive results soon, depending on how that goes. That's really up to the Trump administration to decide.
If we wait that long, you think Ohio looks bad now. Wait until we're 2 years into a recession and Ohio will be unrecognizable. And that to the point you made initially, which is about bringing jobs back. I haven't talked to a single economist, and I've talked to many, more than a dozen, that say manufacturing jobs will come back in mass the United States ever because that ship, they say, has sailed. And even if it did, let's say it did, it might be 30, 40,000 jobs, which is a relatively insignificant number. Everything we buy will be dramatically more expensive. I went out and bought this the other day because I know an iPhone will cost north of $2,500 if it's made in the United States. Nikes, we're complaining about Vietnam. If we have Nikes made in the United States, they will double at least in price. So we'll save a few jobs. Americans love cheap stuff. We weren't getting ripped off. We want a world in which we buy cheap goods. We wanted it. You know who profited from free trade? We did. Your parents did. America did, because we had the strongest economy on the planet because of, in part, free trade.
Yeah, I've had a lot of Cato Institute employees in my DMs lately trying to complain at me about this. And at the end of the day, I don't think that the number one priority is just low prices on everything, right? We're not just one big, Wall-E society in which Walmart runs everything, and everything is based on whether or not, you can buy everything for cheap. That's obviously a really good thing. But at the end of the day, we're also a country. We're not just an economy. We're not just a market. We're a country with people who live their lives and actually have value. And we don't, at the end of the day, if it's just a corporate system where everything is based on prices and everything is based on consumerism, how much of a country are we? We're more of just a supermarket. What we should be is prioritizing our national security, and we should be prioritizing the well-being of the American people, whether Americans are able to find jobs and whether Americans are able to provide for their families in middle class income without working multiple jobs and without having to go into debt. Those are concerns that young people are really thinking about. And right now in this economy, which is an excessively service-based economy, young people are having issues finding jobs. Young people are having issues buying homes. We're a generation of renters right now, and that's not what it should be. That's not the American dream. And at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of people who are trained to think about market analytics and are trained to think about the economy do not factor in these things. They only think about lines on a chart and not the underlying value within.
One of the things that worries me, Gabe, is that the people around Trump. So in his first, as you know, administration, he had some conventional economists and financial sector guys. And now, I heard Alyssa Farah Griffin, our friend who was in the Trump White House in the first administration. She's on The View now. And today she was saying that his advisor is Peter Navarro. Well, we know Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro is somebody who I interviewed on CNN many times. He's a bit of a hothead. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that he's often convinced of how right he is. And I guess that it concerns me a little bit that Trump seems to be dismissing the advice and the concerns and the stats and the history of tons of economists who say that this won't go well.
Because it never has. Tariffs have never worked.
Because of the history of it. So do you feel that he has the right people around him and that for some reason this time will be different?
I do think he has the right people around him, on trade especially. I think he does. And I think it's no secret that Alyssa Farah Griffin has countersignaled Trump repeatedly and that she's not really a big fan of Trump anymore since working for him in the first White House. I think that Peter Navarro and Robert Lighthizer, these are really smart people who know what they're talking about. And I think that the hothead element, absolutely, he should be confident in himself. If we have people in the White House who aren't completely sure that what they're doing is the right thing, if they don't have that level of confidence, how can we be confident in their ability to do their jobs right and then advise the president to do the right thing?
Interesting. I want to kind of peel back to where this all started and where we started the discussion, which is young men really led Donald Trump into office, arguably more than any group in the country. What is it? What is it about Donald Trump? I hear a lot about this tough guy and the masculinity. I don't hear, with the exception of yourself, a lot about policy. Why do you think he was so successful at turning young men Republican?
Well, I will be the one to admit that most young people don't think in terms of policy. They think in terms of what they see. They don't think about necessarily what needs to be done to address the problem. They see the problem, and that goes with both the left and the right. Trump is a countercultural movement. That's really what it is. Young people like myself, I don't remember really a time before the Obama presidency, and we remember the Biden presidency all too well. For most people in my generation, at least in my grade group, who were in high school and had our school shut down for COVID, some of our worst moments occurred when left-wing policies were used to shut down our lives. And that's something that young people remember all too well. And they really wanted a change. They wanted more freedom. They wanted more freedom to be able to make their own decisions. And they also wanted security, not just actual security like safety, because our cities are very lawless and oftentimes not safe for young families anymore. But it's also about financial security. It's also about economic security. Can we find jobs in this current workforce environment? Can we find a home when housing values are going up to the extent that they are right now? Are we able to buy a home and raise children without having to work multiple jobs, without our education system being as dysfunctional as it seems to be right now? These are the concerns that young people are thinking about, and the Democrats failed to address any of them. They were more concerned about telling people during the first Biden presidency, well, hey, here's what this line on a chart says. This is actually, the economy's actually doing really well. You
Well,
probably remember the Biden surrogates saying that. Well, sure.
It was,
in many
hang on real
statistics,
quick. By every metric, job growth, GDP, unemployment, the stock market, the only single metric you could argue the economy wasn't performing for the last 2 years was inflation, a notable one that was coming down to its target 2% until tariffs. And now people think it will head up well north of where it was 2 years ago because of tariffs. So again, The Economist, I think we all acknowledge they're pretty good at their job. They said the economy was stronger than it's ever been and the envy of the free world in October.
Yeah, I think that might all be true. But at the end of the day, I think it just goes to show that what the economists and what the market analysts are looking at does not translate at the ground level, and especially not for my generation. Young people are just having more and more difficulty finding jobs, getting houses, even renting. Rent costs are going up. These are the things that young people are dealing with. I think a big part of it is that we have an increasingly slanted system in which older Americans are tending to keep more of their wealth, whereas younger Americans are struggling to get in and find their way into the market right now. I think that's a big part. And, that's a big part of the Democratic coalition too. You see a lot of the protests against Doge right now. It's really a geriatric revolt against the Trump administration's cuts to systems that are really not necessary in the first place. I support Medicare. I want to be able to use Medicare. I want to be able to use Social Security, and I want it for my children and grandchildren too. But I think that in many cases, we need to make sure that our government is running efficiently. And when we have a national debt that is the way that it is right now, that's a whole nother can of worms, especially. But at the end of the day, young people are looking at this system that's very much slanted against them. They're not able to worm their way into the market. And if young people are not prioritized, where is the future of this country going to be? Young people should be prioritized in the economy. And right now, the economy is doing the opposite of that. Sure, the economy is broadly making gains and was during the Biden administration, but how is any of that affecting young people? Older Americans were the main demographic over the age of 60 that kind of held their ground and sort of trended towards the Democrats. It's because of that reason, whereas younger Americans swung heavily to the Republican Party.
So interesting to hear you talk about that, Gabe, because this is a lot like what our Gen Z experts said, that COVID was a dividing line.
Yes.
And that they've never recovered, many kids on various levels. And so, it's just fascinating to hear you say it. Gabe, one of the things that she brought up was, how do you define the American dream? What's success for you?
The American dream is being able to own a home, raise children, and provide something of tangible value into the world. Doing what and this is something I've heard before. I don't remember who said it originally, but I think it was Vivek Ramaswamy. Every American has something unique to them that they are able to provide into the world. And the American dream is you being able to provide that unique gift that you have into the world, whether you're proficient at a certain subject or proficient at a certain skill, a trade, or whether you are simply caring for other people. You should be able to apply your unique God-given gifts into the world and to create not only a better life for yourself and your family, but also the country at large. That's the American dream. And the American dream is something that seems out of the realm of possibility for a lot of young Americans. Right now, the feelings among younger Americans are very nihilistic, and that needs to change. And whatever political party or political side addresses that head on is going to be the party that has a generational victory in this country.
What's your major?
Political science. As you can tell, my unique gift is that I like this stuff. I find it interesting.
And do you think that politics is in your future, like running for office?
I don't know yet. I'm going to keep my lanes open, and I just want to be able to provide as much service to my community and this country as I can.
It's good. It's good hearing from you, Matt. It's nice to hear a sane discussion about the issues. That's what we're trying to do here on Sanity. He's Gabe Guidarini, president of the University of Dayton College Republicans. Really appreciate it, man. Enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Really interesting to hear from Gabe there. He is obviously a smart kid. I wish that President Trump could explain the way that Gabe did to the masses about, President Trump always falls back on retribution. They've been screwing us over forever. America sounds stupid. People think we're stupid. That's not that doesn't resonate emotionally. Well, if you're angry, it does. But the way that Gabe was describing it, that we're not just an economy, we're a country, that was interesting to me.
I thought he did a better job than the Treasury Secretary explaining what's happening right now. I disagree with him on just about all accounts, but I do respect the fact that he's bringing facts, not just boisterous opinions.
Yeah.
And I wish more young people were more like Gabe. I think he's one in a million, with all due respect to that generation. I don't think, and he admitted this, that he doesn't think policy is really what drove people to Donald Trump. He acknowledged that. Did a nice job. I understand when you're from Ohio and you look out and you see these empty factories, they ain't coming back. They're never going to be full. We're never going to make stuff here the way we did 40 or 50 years ago.
But
if we did, it'd be unaffordable.
But what he's saying is that if we have morphed into a service economy, and we can do better, we can do more, we can have a broader repertoire. I don't know if those factories are coming back, but we can do more. But again, I just really appreciated his perspective. Now, his timeline won't make people comfortable because people don't want to wait for 2 years in a recession. And by the way, the law of unintended consequences is that if you're in a recession for 18 months, who knows what happens next? Like that ends up having its own collateral damage, if that's what ends up happening now.
JP Morgan believes not just a recession, a global recession will follow in the next 6 months. So he's talking about a 2-year timeline. We all acknowledge the United States economy, the global economy cannot suffer 2 years of this.
As we know, I personally, I don't know if you just heard President Trump's press conference. I find President Trump actually at his most articulate when talking about tariffs. This is something he's felt strongly for 30 years. He speaks quite fluently, I think, about it. Again, it's the politics of retribution. He has a hunch that it'll work, and he has a strong gut feeling that we're getting screwed over. But he's not a student of history, as we know. He doesn't read, as we know. People have to read the presidential daily brief to him. And so I just think that we're putting a lot of stock into this unproven model that he feels so he has so much conviction about.
If there was any example in the history of the world that this works or can work, we'd all feel a little bit better.
That's right.
But there is not. Thanks for being with us.